The case of the United States versus Jeffrey Epstein ends with the defendant's death. The government does not prosecute deceased people. However, information obtained during the investigation of Epstein about other people may still be used against them. As long as the underlying search warrant of Epstein's home and property was valid, then the evidence obtained will be usable against other folks. Authorities seized a lot of documents when they executed a search warrant at Jeffrey Epstein's property. As long as the underlying search warrant was valid, the evidence obtained at Jeffrey Epstein's property can be used in any investigation. In fact, other defendants, not Epstein, may not even have standing to challenge the validity of that underlying warrant. While the criminal case against Epstein is now ended, the civil cases against his estate will go forward. Ideally, Epstein's accusers would want to sue a living defendant who's been convicted of sex trafficking. But now that he's dead, they can still go after his estate. The DOJ will conduct a thorough investigation of Epstein's death while in custody because, believe it or not, Epstein's family may have a cause of action against the jail for his suicide. People in jail awaiting trial have a constitutional right to adequate medical care, and that includes mental health care and the avoidance of suicide. Corrections officials are not automatically liable for a suicide, but if they were deliberately indifferent to the inmate's needs, then they may have liability. Surprisingly, the mere fact that Epstein may have been on suicide watch might not automatically be enough to hold the jail liable. Jail officials must disregard an obvious, strong risk of suicide in order to be held liable. Statistics show that defendants in custody awaiting trial are actually more likely to end their own lives than prisoners who are already convicted and serving their sentence. One explanation for this phenomenon is that people in jail have been suddenly thrown into an environment with which they're not familiar. Their lives as they know it are over. Their jobs, their friends, their families are all gone, and in its place, a concrete cell. The shock can be overwhelming. Over 200 federal prisoners died by suicide between the years 2001 and 2014. We'll have to keep an eye on these cases and these investigations, and we'll see what comes next.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.